A man, humiliated daily, pushed his limit. When the CEO mocked him with an impossible challenge, no one expected his response. What happened next left the entire company in shock. This is a story about resilience, hidden brilliance, and the power of second chances. Before we dive in, make sure to subscribe, hit the like button, and turn on notifications. Stories like this remind us never to underestimate anyone. The Invisible Man. The fluorescent lights of Summit Tech Corporation buzzed softly overhead, casting a sterile glow over the open office space. Glass walls reflected the hurried movements of executives in tailored suits, their voices sharp with urgency, their eyes glued to screens displaying stock prices and project deadlines. The air smelled of expensive coffee and ambition. And then there was Carlos Mendez. At 42, he moved through the office like a shadow, silent, unnoticed, his worn janitor's shoes barely making a sound against the polished floor. His uniform, a faded blue jumpsuit with the company logo barely visible from years of washing, marked him as part of the background. The cleaners, the maintenance crew, they were scenery in the grand theater of corporate success. Most days, Carlos didn't mind. He had long accepted that in places like this, people like him were invisible. But today was different. It started with the printer. A jam machine in the finance department had triggered a minor crisis. A junior analyst, a woman in her 20s with a sleek ponytail and an irritated frown, was stabbing at the buttons in frustration. Carlos approached cautiously. "Need help?" She barely glanced at him. "It's broken." He nodded, reaching for the panel. He had fixed this model a dozen times before. A few careful adjustments, a cleared paper tray, and click, whir, the printer hummed back to life, spitting out the stalled document. The analyst snatched it without a word. Carlos was about to walk away when a voice cut through the air. "Wow, the janitor's a tech genius now." Daniel Graves, CEO of Summit Tech, stood at the entrance of the department, arms crossed, his trademark smirk in place. He was a man who commanded attention. Tall, impeccably dressed, with the kind of confidence that came from never having been told no. A few employees chuckled nervously. Carlos kept his face blank, but his grip tightened on the mop handle. Daniel sauntered closer, eyes flicking over Carlos with amused disdain. "You know, if you're this good with printers, maybe we should promote you to IT." Another ripple of laughter. Carlos forced a small, polite smile. "Just doing my job, sir." Daniel's grin widened, as if delighted by the response. "That's what I like to hear. Humility." He clapped Carlos on the shoulder, too hard, just shy of painful, before turning to the room. "See? This man understands his place." The words hung in the air, sharp as a blade. Carlos exhaled slowly. He had heard worse. He had endured worse. But today, something inside him burned. He turned back to his cart, pretending to adjust the cleaning supplies, when a folded sheet of paper landed on top of his trash bag. Daniel's voice was low, meant only for him. "Translate this by tomorrow, and my salary's yours." A pause. "Bet you can't even read it." Carlos picked up the document. The characters were dense, intricate, Mandarin. The room had gone quiet. Employees pretended not to watch, but their eyes darted between them, waiting. Daniel leaned in, his breath warm against Carlos' ear. "What's the matter?" "Not as smart as you thought." Carlos didn't react. He simply folded the paper and slipped it into his pocket. Daniel laughed, turning away. "That's what I figured." As the CEO strode off, the office returned to its usual hum. But Carlos stood there, fingers brushing the edge of the document in his pocket. He had understood every single word, and what he read changed everything. The silent storm. The moment Carlos stepped into the janitor's closet, a cramped, dimly lit room smelling of bleach and damp mops. He pulled out the document again. His hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the sheer weight of what he held. The contract was written in flawless Mandarin, but that wasn't what made his pulse quicken. It was the content. Summit Tech was negotiating a backdoor deal with a Chinese manufacturing firm, one that would outsource hundreds of jobs overseas. Worse, buried in the fine print were clauses that would nullify severance packages for the laid-off employees. A quiet massacre disguised as a business decision. Carlos exhaled sharply, leaning against the shelves. He had spent years in the shadows of his company, listening to conversations no one thought he understood, watching the way power moved in hushed tones and closed-door meetings. He knew Daniel Graves, knew his ruthlessness, his hunger for profit at any cost. But this was betrayal on another level. A knock at the door startled him. He shoved the paper into his pocket just as Maria, the head of HR, poked her head in. "Carlos, the break room fridge is leaking again. Can you take a look?" He nodded, forcing calm into his voice. "I'll be right there." Maria hesitated, studying him. "You okay? You look tense." Carlos wiped his hands on his uniform. "Just a long day." She gave him a sympathetic smile. "Aren't they all?" As she left, Carlos pressed his palms against his temples. He had a choice to make. Flashback, Caracas, Venezuela. 7 years earlier, the university lecture hall was packed. Students scribbling notes as Professor Carlos Mendez paced at the front, dissecting the nuances of Mandarin syntax. His wife, Elena, sat in the back row, beaming with pride. After class, she handed him a cup of coffee, her fingers brushing his. "You're a rock star," she teased. He laughed. "Only in my own mind." That was before the economy collapsed, before the protests, the shortages, the night Elena went out for medicine and never came home, caught in the crossfire of a riot, before Carlos, clutching his young daughter Lucia's hand, boarded a plane with nothing but a suitcase and a visa tied to a low-wage job in a country that saw him as expendable. Present day, Summit Tech break room. Carlos tightened the valve under the fridge, water dripping onto his sleeves. Around him, employees chatted, oblivious. "Did you hear Graves challenge a janitor to translate something?" A junior developer muttered to his friend. "No way. In what language?" "Chinese, I think." Total power move. They laughed. Carlos' jaw clenched. Then a voice cut through. He was going to get fired. Carlos turned. It was Jake, a lanky IT guy who sometimes nodded at him in the hall. Jake lowered his voice. "Graves does this stuff all the time. Find a way to humiliate people until they quit." He shook his head. "Sorry, man." Carlos wiped his hands. "Thanks for the warning." But as he walked away, his mind raced. He could play dumb, hand back the document tomorrow with a shrug, say he couldn't translate it, keep his job, his paycheck, the tiny apartment where Lucia slept under a blanket covered in stars. Or he could do something reckless. That night, Carlos' apartment. Lucia, now 9, sat at their kitchen table, frowning over her math homework. Carlos stirred a pot of rice and beans, the document burning a hole in his backpack. "Papa, what's this word?" She pointed to her worksheet. He leaned over. "Perseverance. It means not giving up, even when things are hard." She scribbled the definition, then looked up. "Like you?" His throat tightened. "What do you mean?" "You work so much, but you never complain." Carlos kissed her forehead. "Because you're worth it." Later, after she fell asleep, he sat at the table, the contract spread before him. He typed the translation on his old laptop, adding footnotes that highlighted the hidden clauses in red. Then he did something unexpected. He printed 2 copies, one for Daniel, and one for the company's whistleblower hotline, the Gambit. The next morning, the air inside Summit Tech felt charged, as if the entire building was holding its breath. Carlos walked through the lobby, his backpack heavy with the weight of the translated documents. His fingers twitched at his side, his mind replaying that cryptic message over and over. Who knew? He had spent the night turning possibilities over in his head. Was it a test from Graves? A warning from someone else in the company? Or was he just being paranoid? The elevator ride to the executive floor was agonizingly slow. Each ding of the floor's passing made his pulse spike. When the doors finally opened, he was met with the sight of Daniel's assistant, a sharp-eyed woman named Naomi, typing furiously at her desk. She glanced up, her expression unreadable. "He's waiting for you." Carlos swallowed hard. No turning back now. Daniel's office. The CEO sat behind a sprawling glass desk, his back to the floor-to-ceiling windows that showcased the city skyline. He didn't look up as Carlos entered, just kept scrolling through something on his tablet. So, Daniel said finally, setting the tablet down, "Did you crack the code?" Carlos reached into his bag and pulled out the translated document. He placed it on the desk without a word. Daniel's smirk faltered as he flipped through the pages. His eyes darted across the footnotes. Carlos' meticulous annotations highlighting every damning clause. The room was so quiet Carlos could hear the rustle of paper. Then Daniel looked up, his face unreadable. "You speak Mandarin." It wasn't a question. Carlos met his gaze. "I taught it at the University of Caracas." A beat of silence. Daniel leaned back in his chair, studying him like a puzzle he couldn't quite solve. "And yet here you are, cleaning floors." Carlos didn't flinch. Life doesn't always go as planned. Daniel's lips curled, but it wasn't a smile. It was something colder. "You could have taken this to the press. Or the board. Why didn't you?" Carlos had rehearsed this moment in his head all night. He could have lied. Could have said he was loyal to the company. But the truth was simpler. "Because I don't care about destroying you," he said quietly. "I just care about keeping my job." Daniel's expression flickered. Something almost like surprise. Then just as quickly it was gone. He tapped the document. "You realize what this means, right? This deal is worth millions. If it leaks, it's not just my reputation on the line. It's the entire company's." Carlos said nothing. Daniel exhaled sharply, then pressed a button on his desk. "Naomi, call security." Carlos' stomach dropped. This is it. He'd gambled and lost. But then Daniel added, "And cancel my 10 o'clock. Naomi's voice crackled through the intercom. "Sir, you heard me." The intercom clicked off. Daniel stood, walking around the desk until he was face to face with Carlos. For a long moment, he just stared at him, as if seeing him for the first time. Then, in a voice so low Carlos almost missed it, "What do you want?" The question hung between them, heavy with implication. Carlos had expected threats, intimidation, maybe even a bribe. But this was something else entirely. Before he could answer, the office door burst open. Naomi stood there, her face pale. "Mr. Graves, the board just called an emergency meeting. They know about the deal." Daniel's head snapped toward her. "What?" "Someone leaked it." Her eyes darted to Carlos. "And they're naming him as the source." The air left Carlos' lungs. He had only printed 2 copies. One was still in his bag, which meant someone else had gotten their hands on the contract. And now they were framing him. The reckoning. The security officers moved forward, their hands hovering near their belts where handcuffs glinted. Carlos' mind raced. If he was accused of corporate espionage, he wouldn't just lose his job. He could face criminal charges. Deportation. Losing Lucia. Daniel raised a hand, stopping the guards. His gaze never left Carlos. "Wait outside." Naomi hesitated. "Sir, the board is demanding." I said wait outside. The room emptied, leaving only the 2 of them. Daniel's polished facade cracked, revealing something raw beneath. "Start talking. Now." Carlos forced his voice steady. "I didn't leak anything. I brought you the translation directly." "Then how the hell did the board get it?" Daniel snatched the second copy from Carlos' bag, comparing them. His breath hitched. "These footnotes are different. Yours just highlight the clauses. The leaked version has commentary calling me a corporate predator." He threw the papers down. "You expect me to believe this is a coincidence?" A realization struck Carlos. The whistleblower copy he'd filed was anonymous. No added commentary. This was sabotage. Check the metadata. Carlos said suddenly, "The digital file I printed from would show edits. If someone altered it after me." Daniel's eyes narrowed. He grabbed his laptop, fingers flying across the keys. After a tense minute, he froze. "Last modified, 4:17 a.m. by user J. Richardson. Jake Richardson. Carlos exhaled sharply. "He warned me last night. Sent a text saying he knew about the document." Daniel's face darkened with recognition. "Jake's been gunning for a promotion for months. His father sits on the board." The pieces clicked together. a disgruntled employee with access and a vendetta, using Carlos as a fall guy. A knock interrupted them. Naomi's voice was urgent. "Daniel, they're voting to suspend you in 10 minutes." Daniel closed his eyes, jaw working. When he opened them, something had shifted. "You know what this contract really is?" He tapped the papers. "A lifeline. Our patents are being stolen overseas. This deal was supposed to secure our tech before the Chinese launch a knockoff next month." He met Carlos' gaze. "I wasn't outsourcing jobs. I was trying to save them." The admission hung between them. Carlos studied Daniel. The tension in his shoulders, the desperation in his eyes. For the first time, the CEO looked human. Carlos made a decision. "Let me talk to the board." Daniel barked a laugh. "You? A janitor?" "I was also a tenured professor of Eastern languages," Carlos said quietly. "And right now, I'm the only one who can prove that document was altered." A beat passed. Then Daniel grabbed his suit jacket. "Fine, but you screw this up, we're both finished." The boardroom. 12 pairs of eyes turned as they entered. At the head of the table sat Gerald Richardson, Jake's father, his smile smug. Ah, the whistleblower and the disgraced CEO. How poetic. Daniel ignored him, addressing the room. "Before you vote, you should hear from the man who translated this." He gestured to Carlos. Gerald scoffed. "The janitor? This is absurd. I can prove the leaked document was falsified." Carlos' voice cut through the murmurs. He approached the projector, inserting his flash drive. The original translation contained no subjective commentary, but this version. He pulled up both files side by side, highlighting the timestamps and edit history. Was modified by Jake Richardson at 4:17 a.m. The room erupted. Gerald shot to his feet. "Lies! My son would never." "Check the server logs," Carlos challenged. "Every edit leaves a fingerprint." A tech specialist hurried forward, typing rapidly. After a tense minute, she nodded. "He's right. The metadata confirms it." Gerald paled. Daniel seized the moment. This was an attempt to force me out by sabotaging a deal that protects his company. And I have proof Gerald knew. He played a recording. Jake's voice, bragging to a colleague about his father's backing. Chaos ensued. Board members shouted over each other. Phones buzzed with incoming messages, and Gerald stormed out, spitting threats. Through it all, Carlos stood silent, watching Daniel. The CEO who'd mocked him yesterday now owed him everything. Aftermath. In the empty hallway, Daniel loosened his tie, exhaling hard. Jake's fired. Gerald's resigning. The deal's back on. He turned to Carlos. "I owe you." Carlos shook his head. "I didn't do it for you." A ghost of a smile touched Daniel's lips. "I know." He hesitated, then extended his hand. "So what now? You want a reward? Money? A promotion?" Carlos considered it. He thought of Lucia's worn shoes, the landlord's increasing complaints, the way his back ached after years of mopping floors. But more than that, he thought of Elena, who'd always believed he was meant for more. "I want to see at the table," he said finally. "Not as a janitor, not as a translator. As someone who ensures no employee gets treated like I was." Daniel studied him for a long moment. Then, slowly, he nodded. "Done." As they shook on it, Carlos realized something had shifted. Not just for him, but for Daniel, too. The arrogant CEO had been humbled. The invisible janitor had been seen. And tomorrow, everything would change. The ripple effect. 1 year later. The glass doors of Summit Tech's executive wing slid open with a hushed whoosh. Carlos Mendez, now director of ethical operations, stepped inside, his polished dress shoes reflecting the morning sunlight streaming through the atrium. The same employees who once ignored him now nodded respectfully as he passed. "Morning, Mr. Mendez." "Looking forward to your presentation today, sir." He returned the greetings with a warm smile, but his mind was elsewhere. That encrypted message from a year ago still haunted him. Project Phoenix. He had searched every database, every archive file, but found nothing, and Daniel had flatly denied any knowledge when asked. Yet the warning had come from someone who knew things they shouldn't. The boardroom, present day. Carlos stood at the head of the same table where his fate had been decided a year prior. Behind him, a screen displayed the company's latest initiative, Summit Tech Global Outreach, bridging opportunities through language. Thanks to our interpreter teams, Carlos said, gesturing to the data, we've reduced outsourcing by 42% by training local talent in their native languages. And this. He clicked to a photo of Lucia grinning at a computer in Summit's new after-school program for employees' children, is why it matters. The board applauded. Daniel, now a quieter but more decisive leader, gave him an approving nod. After the meeting, Daniel pulled Carlos aside. You've changed this company. Hell, you changed me. He hesitated. There's something I need to show you. The basement archives. Keycard protected and climate controlled. This section of Summit Tech was off-limits to most. Daniel swiped his access badge, revealing rows of servers and locked filing cabinets. Project Phoenix, Daniel said quietly, pulling a dusty binder from a hidden compartment. My father's legacy. Carlos flipped it open and froze. Inside were blueprints for an AI designed to manipulate stock markets by flooding news cycles with algorithmically generated rumors. Test runs showed terrifying accuracy in crashing or inflating companies' values. It was shelved after the SEC nearly caught wind in 2012, Daniel admitted. But Gerald Richardson knew about it. He's been blackmailing me for years to keep it buried. Carlos' blood ran cold. And the encrypted message? Daniel's face darkened. Gerald's last play. He leaked Phoenix's existence to someone, hoping I'd pay to keep it quiet. He met Carlos' gaze. I'm done hiding. We're taking this to the DOJ today. But I wanted you to hear it from me first. Carlos studied the schematics, the potential for global financial chaos. Then he closed the binder with finality. Let's end this. Epilogue, 3 months later. News headlines blared. Former Summit Tech board member sentenced for insider trading. DOJ praises whistleblowers in landmark corporate espionage case. At a small park near their new apartment. Carlos watched Lucia chase bubbles, her laughter ringing through the spring air. Daniel approached, holding 2 coffees. Still getting used to being a hero? Daniel asked, handing him a cup. Carlos smiled. Just a guy who cleans up messes. Daniel chuckled, but his tone grew serious. The DOJ offered me immunity for turning over Phoenix. But this company, it needs fresh leadership. He extended a business card. Summit Tech, interim CEO. Carlos Mendez. Carlos stared at it. You're joking. I've never been more serious. You got the ethics, the vision, and Daniel grinned. You're the only one who scares the hell out of the board. Carlos looked at Lucia, now teaching another child how to blow bubbles. He thought of Elena, of the janitor's closet where his journey began, of the countless invisible workers he could now uplift. He took the card. This story proves that integrity always wins. Want more real-life tales of underdogs who change the game? Smash that like button, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. Your next dose of inspiration is just 1 click away.